الصلاة والسلام 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 الله سلام الله
I'm being invited to speak about my life from my early childhood, something I've never done before. Nazar Hussain was my grandfather. So we are Khorasani. But my great-grandfather had two wives, and from him to this day, the only other one in the family with two wives is myself. And he said, well, we can get married and you can still remain a Christian. That's not a problem in Islam. We were a family in which my father never allowed his children to go to the maktab. And so when I left Trinidad at the age of 21 to go to study at Al-Azhar University, I could barely recite the Quran in Arabic. One bag of oranges, 100 oranges for $1. So the Pakistani would say, it's cool, put an alif in front. This was my taste of what an Islamic scholar could do when an Islamic scholar is faithful to the Quran. And when my father was dying, he called his friend to the hospital and handed over charge of the family to him. His name was Lakshman. And so I probably was the first student ever to enter Al-Azhar University and then to leave Al-Azhar to come to study in Pakistan. This is the wisest decision I've ever taken in my life. My heart could become Pakistani, but my stomach couldn't become Pakistani. When I showed it to the Maulana, he took a red pen. The road is narrow, a car is coming from the other opposite direction, and you're absolutely certain these two cars are going to crash. In my classmate is the daughter of the most famous lawyer in Pakistan, A.K. Brohi. I want you to go back home and I want your hand to be like this and not like this. From the day the classes started, I was up immediately at the top. Why? Because I had the training from the Quran. And my mother-in-law, who was the wife of Maulana Ansari, she sat down with Dr. Israr, I don't know, for maybe an hour or more. And when I went to Pakistan, I was really tremendously impressed by the Tanzim Islami. The Sufi sheikhs had never done what he did, and what Maulana Abdullah Maududi did, rahimahullah. The discipline, the organization of the Tanzim Islami was admirable to behold. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We begin with Allah's blessed name. We praise Him and we glorify Him as He ought to be praised and glorified. And we pray for peace and for blessings on all His noble messengers, and in particular on the last of them all, the Blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, as we greet you from the city of Rawalpindi in Pakistan, in this, the month of Ramadan 1442, with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is the 14th day of Ramadan today, and tonight is called in Urdu Chaudawi Ka Chand. When the 14th day has ended, then the Urdu-speaking people celebrate the full moon. But imagine my surprise when I found that Allah had a different way. When Allah arranged the Quran, He gave us Surah An-Nur when the 15th day has ended. So the full moon with Allah is when the 15th day has ended and the 16th night begins. Then He gave us Surah An-Nur. I just realized that this is the difference between Allah's calculation and the calculation of others. because the month is 30 days, sometime 29. So the full moon is when the 15th day has ended, not Chaudavi ka Chand. So today we are on the 14th day of Ramadan, and we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might accept our fasting, our salatul tarawih, our recitation of the Quran, and our sadaqah and zakat. This is a very interesting interview today because I'm being invited to speak about my life from my early childhood, something I've never done before. But I think it's important now because so many people around the world look up to me as a teacher. So it's important to put into the record something about my life history, not for the purpose of boasting and blowing my own trumpet or so, not at all. Merely for putting it into the record so people may know who I am. I was born in the Caribbean island of Trinidad. Trinidad and Tobago, these two islands constitute one state. It was formerly a British colonial territory, like most of the islands of the Caribbean, but the French, the Spanish, the Dutch, and the British were always fighting with each other for possession of these islands. And so Trinidad was once a Spanish territory. And the capital was had a Spanish name, San Jose. And you have a lot of Spanish terms still used in Trinidad. French terms are still used in Trinidad. Many places are French name. But eventually it became a British territory. And in 1962, we became an independent state. And we are located, Trinidad is located just 9 miles away from Venezuela. So there's a very powerful Spanish influence on Trinidad. In fact, I used to teach Spanish myself until the age of 21 when I left my job as a teacher in a primary school and I traveled to Egypt. But now I've forgotten most of my Spanish. That's how important Spanish is in Trinidad. My father was a school principal, and he chose to give me the name Imran. But it's not just Imran. He gave me Imran, Khalid, Ahmad, Nazar Hussain. Nazar Hussain was my grandfather. And I was a child when my grandfather died. I couldn't remember him. But I asked my father, from where did our family come? And his answer was that we came from Hyderabad, Deccan, in India. But my uncle, who is the son of my grandfather's brother, my father's cousin, his name was Tawfiq Hussain. My father was Ibrahim Nazar Hussain, and this uncle was Tawfiq Hussain, and he lived in Vancouver. So I traveled to Vancouver in the year 2000 to meet my uncle and to spend a whole week with him. And I was astonished. He had blue eyes. And my father had gray eyes, light gray eyes. So when I said to my uncle that this is what my father said, my father died when I was only 15 years of age. In 1957, when I was 15 years of age. I was born in 1942, so I only knew my father up to age 15. So my uncle said, no, your father is wrong. Your father has not given you the complete picture. He says, the family came from the area of Afghanistan, the northwest of Pakistan, the northeast, the east of Iran, and the north of Afghanistan, that area which is called Khorasan. He says the family left that part of the world and went down to Hyderabad. And from there they left to come to Trinidad. So we are Khorasani. So he said, here's the proof. The proof is that in this family we have different colors of eyes. My uncle was blue eyes. I have a cousin living in London now. His daughter has green eyes. And my father had light gray eyes. And I remember two of my grandfathers. I remember them when I was a boy. And if you see them today, you will say, these people have come straight out of Afghanistan. They were tall, gaunt, well-built, very fair in complexion, and they had this image of the Afghan people. I remember these two uncles, my grandfather's two brothers. So here was the proof, living proof, that my father did not give the complete picture. So it was my great-grandfather. My father he worked with a lawyer, he was an assistant to a lawyer. But my great-grandfather, my grandfather was Nazar Hussain, my great-grandfather Ilahi Baksh. So he came from Hyderabad about 150 years ago. But his forefathers are from Khorasan. So I am Imran Hussain Khorasani. My grandfather, I never met him, I never met my great-grandfather. But my great-grandfather had two wives. And from him to this day, the only other one in the family with two wives is myself. I'm the only one. Everybody else have not followed from the footsteps of my great-grandfather. He had two wives, and he had several sons. I never met any of his daughters, but some of the sons were in his image, so Afghan looking, and some of the sons were in the image of his wife. So they were darker in complexion and different shape. On my mother's side now, my father married my mother in exceptional circumstances. My father was a school teacher. He went to the training college to be trained as a teacher. And while training in the training college for 2 years, he fell in love with one of his classmates, who was a Christian woman. But she was a pakka, very staunch Christian. And he said, well, we can get married and you can still remain a Christian. That's not a problem in Islam. But the problem was, she said, yes, we can get married, but if we have children, Imran will have to be a Christian. And my father said, no. If we have children, Imran will have to be brought up as a Muslim. So there was stalemate for 11 years, stalemate. Both deeply in love with each other, but because of religion, there was stalemate. After 11 years, when my father was promoted and he became a school principal, at the age of about 40, he became a school principal. He said, I've waited enough. So he then went to the head of the Muslim community, and a venerable old man, Sayyid Abdul Ghani, I know him as a child, and he said, find me a wife. Abdul Ghani had two sons, and the second son, he went to the countryside to find a girl for him. He didn't want that he should lose this son. And when he went to the countryside to find that girl, and his son married that girl, it was my auntie, she knew about my mother, because two brothers who were goldsmiths left the city and went to the remote countryside and bought a large parcel of land and built a big beautiful wooden house. And the two brothers lived in the same house with their wives. A remarkable family. And there were 12 children in that house. Imagine, I am now writing a history of that house. And I've written more than 100 pages. It is a remarkable house. So my mother was born in that house. And all the girls were married when they were 14, 15, 16 years of age. So my mother was also married. But her husband died after just 1 year and she had a baby. So she had to return home as a widow. And she remained there for about 5 years. So my auntie said to her father-in-law, Sayyid Abdul-Ghani, Taimun. So Sayyid Abdul-Ghani, who was the head of the Muslim community, he arranged the marriage. And my father said, I waited long enough for her. So then he married my mother. And I was the first child. And this was Allah's kindness to him. That because my father refused that his children should be brought up any other than as Muslims, the first child to be born was destined to become a scholar of Islam. This is Allah's response for this qurban that my father made. And when my father married my mother, the school where he was the principal was very far away, and my mother had to remain at home to take care of my grandfather who was ill. So my father would spend a week at the school and then take the train to come home for the weekend. So during the week, the news reached my mother that the Christian woman died. That she had an operation, she died on the operating. Maybe she was heartbroken as well. So that weekend, when my father came, my mother cooked a lovely dinner for him. Yes, and then she waited until he was in the rocking chair, having eaten dinner. And then she said to him that Madri had died. My father threw himself on the bed and he cried and he cried and he cried. He didn't hold back anything. And then he went and he got red roses. He went to the cemetery and he put the red roses. He didn't hide the fact that he so loved this woman. So he did make the sacrifice of the woman he loved so that Imran would grow as a Muslim. This was the side of my family, my mother's side, and that wonderful home in the remote countryside, a wooden home. I have the photograph of that home now for the book I'm writing. The father's family came from Khorasan, so they are the more warlike people. They're more, their profile is one of a very powerful backbone. But my mother's side family came from Bihar. And on that side of the family, they're all very gentle people. So this was a mixture in this marriage of the one side is Khorasani and the other side is Bihar. We were a family in which my father never allowed his children to go to the maktab. So all the other children in the village were going to the masjid, to the maktab, and learning to recite the Quran, studying the Arabic alphabet, alif, ba, ta, so on. But not my father's children. My father was influenced by the modernist version of Islam, the rational version of Islam, and he was not at all impressed by what was coming from the masjid. And that's why he kept us away. And so when I left Trinidad at the age of 21 to go to study at Al-Azhar University, I could barely recite the Quran in Arabic. Barely. I just learned at the age of 18, I learned to write Surah Al-Fatiha in Arabic because I took a course of 1 week. This was a very sad part of my childhood. No one in my family performed salat on my father's side. And on my mother's side, that big house with 12 children, maybe some of the women might perform inside of the bedroom, but I never saw it. None of the men were performing salat. No. So on both sides of the family, it seemed we had already begun to depart from the way of life of Islam. I know of no home on either side where people left their shoes outside. And inside of the home, you had to keep the home clean. And you don't need a PhD to know that when you're walking outside with your shoes can have filthy things attached to it. And you wouldn't want that to come inside of a house. The house is a place like when Musa alayhi salam was in the valley of Tuwa, then Allah said to him, take off your shoes. You are in the sacred valley of Tuwa. Similarly in the home, the Muslim always, not just the Muslim, the Hindu, the Buddhist, all the people of the East, they would leave their shoes outside. Japan, you leave your shoes outside. You don't bring your shoes inside. But in my family, we had already lost that. So on both sides of my family. Secondly, I don't see the men of my family on either side wearing native clothing. By the time I was born as a child, 80 years ago, they had all given up their native clothing that they brought from India and were all dressed in the Western clothing. It is from that background that I emerged. But my father, because he sacrificed the love of his life so that his children should grow up as Muslim, at least one. None of the others of my brothers and sisters performed salat, none of them. One of them, in the last 2 years of his life, he was just 1 year younger than me, he fasted for the whole of Ramadan, the last 2 years of his life. He was just 1 year younger than me. And then 2 years ago, as he fasted for Ramadan, he went to the masjid for Salatul Eid. The next day he died. The next day he died. But the other brothers and sisters I have, none of them fast in Ramadan. None of them perform the salat, the daily salat. And therefore, Imran is the answer, the result of the qurban or the sacrifice that my father made. May Allah have mercy on him. When I was 5 years of age, he bought a motor car, a British car, Hillman makes, so he can take me to school. And because he took me to school, the car now allowed us to go visiting families. So from the year 1947 when he bought the car until the year 1957 when he died, for 10 years, we the children had happy times. We were allowed to go visiting family constantly. It was a very sensible thing that he did. And when the summer vacations came in June, July, August, not the girls, only the boys, me and my brother, he would send us to spend vacation at the home of this uncle and that auntie and this uncle and that auntie, and my grandfather's brother and son. And these were wonderful, wonderful experiences for us, to go and spend holidays at the home of relatives, bring back much memories and experience of living with other people. He took me to the market. The market was on Saturdays. And at the age of 5, I'm holding a little basket and walking with my father in the market. And I saw him buy a bag. There were no plastic bags at that time. The bags were made out of jute. One bag of oranges, 100 oranges, for $1. This distinct memory remains with me, because 75 years later, with $1, you cannot even buy one orange. So tell the Mufti it's time for him to wake up. Our Muftis are eating biryani or couscous or whatever it is and falling asleep. And they refuse to declare that this paper money is bogus and fraudulent and haram, and is functioning as a vehicle for the exploitation of the masses and extraction of the wealth and the transfer of wealth like a vacuum sucking the wealth of the world and transferring that wealth to those who are the hard currency people. The US dollar, hard currency. The British pound, hard currency. The euro, hard currency. So they are the ones who are sucking the wealth through a bogus monetary system, but that's a different story. But this experience of going to the market and seeing the prices of goods at that age of 5 helped me in later years when I began to study monetary economics. I was living in a village called St. Thomas Village in Chaguanas. It's the center of the island. And my mother also came from a village of Balmain, also in the center of the country. But the best colleges of the country were in the north. Queen's Royal College was built by the British to be the premier institution for secondary education. And from Queen's Royal College, you would go to university. And my father, because he devoted such a tremendous amount of time and attention to his children's education, decided I have to get into that college. So there is a competitive examination at the age of 11, 12. And if you place in the first 200 in the island, you get a government scholarship. So I placed 68 in the island and I got a scholarship. And I started attending Queen's Royal College. And it was a boring experience for me at the age of 12, because it was a secular institution. And I wanted to go to the Roman Catholic College because there were priests over there. And these were religious people, and I was naturally attracted to religious people. But no, my father wouldn't listen to that. He didn't want me to go to a Christian school. No. So I went to Queen's Royal College, and it was a very ordinary experience. The only time I excelled, really excelled, in secondary school was when it came to poetry. Poetry. I was a natural orator. And it immediately became clear that Allah had blessed me with oratory. So I would be excelling in poetry and literature and so on. So I was never more than an ordinary student in the secondary school. But while I was at secondary school, there used to be a period for religious instruction. And well, we didn't call him a Maulana, he was known as a Mulvi. He used to come to teach on I think it was a Friday morning. And even though my father died while I was just 15, I still got some of that religious training when this Mulvi would come and teach us on Friday mornings. But just before my father died, something happened. And that is that 3 of the older boys of the town came to meet my father. I am just 12, 13 years of age, but these are 16, 15, 16. And they had to be very brave to come to meet my father, because he is a school principal. All the other Muslims are businessmen or farmers, or he's a school principal. He's the only one. So they came to tell my father that we are establishing an Islamic youth movement, and we want your sons. Surprise of all surprises, my father agreed. Astonishingly so. Out of the 3 who came to meet my father, 1 has died now. But one of them is still in London. He's about 80-something years of age, like an elder brother to me. And another one is in Toronto in Canada. So my father agreed. So now I began to attend meetings of the Shagornas Muslim Youth Organization. And they taught me the Darood Sharif. I never knew the Darood Sharif. And they taught me how to perform Salat. I never knew how to perform Salat. This was a wonderful experience. But in addition to teaching us, the elder boys were teaching the younger ones. We had boys and girls in this youth movement. And in addition to teaching us the religion, they did something else. They said, when we teach you, you have to go and teach others. So they will organize something called a cottage meeting. Somebody will allow his home to be used, and maybe there's a big open space underneath the house, and they'll get chairs. And the night is fixed, and all the villagers will be invited in different parts of the island. And we'll go and we have to speak. So the first time they trained me to lecture on the tragedy of Karbala. And it was divided into 3 parts, part 1, part 2, part 3. So they put me on a soapbox to stand up, and I have to speak. This is the training. But when we were in the training sessions, it became clear Imran is a born orator, a born orator. So when we went out now to have these cottage meetings, Alhamdulillah, I was able to do very well as a speaker, indicating that there is a future coming in oratory, in lecturing and so on. And so this was my Islamic education. From the Islamic youth movement, and then from the teacher who used to come to teach us on Friday mornings at the Queen's Royal College. As soon as I left the college and I began working as a teacher, because my father was dead, we were all orphans, my mother needed some income. So I started working at the age of 17 as a teacher. And the next year, something extraordinary happened in my life at the age of 18. And that is that a Maulana was coming to Trinidad. We never saw a Maulana. We only know about this Maulvi and that Maulvi and that Maulvi, that's all. His name was Maulana Muhammad Fadlur Rahman Ansari, and he was a very, very famous man. And this 18-year-old was very excited now. When the Maulana came, he selected our local masjid one day for a lecture. So I'm seeing him for the first time. And the subject is Islam and science. But I had done science at Queen's Royal College. And I could see no relationship between Islam and science. So I said, what is this Maulana going to do? What is he going to have to say about Islam and science? This is an impossible topic he's chosen. So I was skeptical about this Maulana and this lecture. But we did the work, we concreted. I was mixing concrete to prepare the floor and so on. And the night came, and as usual, the place is ram-packed. And then the Maulana began to speak. But he's speaking English in a Pakistani accent. So their approach to English is from Urdu. In Urdu, you don't begin a letter with a consonant. You have to link with a vowel. So it's not school. You can't join S and K. So the Pakistani would say, school, put an alif in front. And we never heard this before. We're hearing this Maulana speaking English in a Pakistani accent. But after a while, we began to be able to understand what he was saying. And his English was far above our comprehension. We thought we were uneducated people, but this man knew the English language far better than us. But the surprise was that he knew science much better than I did. Yes. And when he began to reveal the Quran, to show from the Quran what the Quran had to offer for the scientific method and so on, I was left with my mouth open. I couldn't believe it. Nobody has ever done that before. To go to the Quran and extract from the Quran that which explains, for example, the scientific method. It was astonishing. No Imam could do that. This was my taste of what an Islamic scholar could do when an Islamic scholar is faithful to the Quran. So I was hooked. I was hooked. I listened to a few more of his lectures. I never got a chance to meet with him personally, just to be sitting in the gathering. And when he was leaving the country, he spent about 6 weeks. This is 1960, and I'm 18 years of age. When he was leaving the country, there's a farewell lecture. And the hall is packed, no place to sit down. You have to stand up. It's a huge gathering to say goodbye. And he lectured, and I'm standing at the back. I'm getting tired standing so long. At the end of the lecture, he said, I have an appeal to make. I want 5 young men from this country to come forward to study Islam abroad, to be trained. So I said to myself, Imran, you're one of them. You are one of them. Then he left. And I continued working as a teacher for 2 more years. And then in 63,